Hey folks, in this video we will explain how the Sentry fights the Hulk, Spider-Man, and Doctor Strange. Comics explained. At the beginning, everyone has forgotten who the Sentry is supposed to be. The Sentry himself is more schizophrenic than anything else, or at least he seems that way because any normal human being won't be insisting that he was once a superhero who has now been forgotten. So it's more of Robert Reynolds now, and the first few images we get of him are quite odd. For instance, he is wearing a half cape that has been clipped onto his back with clothesline pins. He really looks crazy, and coming from the previous issue of the series, Robert Reynolds has since devolved into this depressed and alcoholic side of him. So his plan of action once he gets sober is to pay a visit to his old hero pals in a bid to piece his past and identify together. The first person he visits is Richard Reed, or Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. As expected, Reed doesn't recognize him and questions how Reynolds was able to bypass the force field surrounding the Baxter building. Reed also makes the mistake of assuming Reynolds may be mentally ill. Then Reynolds drops a memory bomb on Reed. He asks Reed to remember a wedding and more specifically a statuette of a unicorn. Reed gets back home to the Baxter building, and the first thing he does is ask his wife about all the things Reynolds mentioned, like the wedding as it relates to the so-called unicorn. The Thing and the Human Torch don't care any less as they both watch some TV. As Reed and the Invisible Woman converse, they find that the unicorn is right under their noses and has been there all the while. But the strangest thing is they don't remember its backstory. Also, they both admit that it reminds them of deja vu. There's a videotape sitting right underneath the unicorn, and so Reed puts it in a VCR player as the team gathers around to watch the mysterious message. The tape has Reed sending a message to himself. The tape literally says that if Reed himself ever gets to watch this, then the Sentry, and by extension, the Void, have returned, and life as they know it is doomed. Next, we are transported to a meeting between Robert Reynolds and the Hulk. We know the Hulk usually likes to be left to himself when he assumes the role of the Green Giant, but as Robert Reynolds approaches him, there's a hint of recognition and friendship between them. The Hulk is happy to see the Golden Man, as he put it. At least someone still remembers who the Sentry is supposed to be, but Robert is kind of skeptical and thinks if the Hulk were in his human form as Bruce Banner, then perhaps they wouldn't be so familiar with each other. Robert then tells the Hulk that the Void is coming back, and we can see that the Hulk is somewhat scared because of this news. Robert tells him he has to be strong for what's coming. We go back to a few scenes with Reed Richards. His interest has now been piqued, so he checks his files for clues on what exactly is happening with this Robert Reynolds character, who claims to be the Sentry. Reed dives deep into his archives and his journal and realizes that Robert Reynolds is supposed to be dead and buried. It's another way of saying he is in a witness protection program. But the fact that he has resurfaced in the way he did means something crazy is afoot. Next, Robert pays a visit to Spider-Man and mentions his real identity. Ideally, they're supposed to know each other on such a personal level, but Spider-Man pretends he doesn't know what Robert is going on about. Robert tries to jog his memory by producing a photo of himself as the Sentry taken by Peter Parker, which won a Pulitzer Prize. But all Spider-Man sees is a blank Polaroid. Whatever it is, Spider-Man, like all the other Marvel heroes, have somehow been programmed to forget the Sentry. Next, we see Reed going through some more files in a basement to get to the bottom of the problem. He finds a few newspaper clippings that say all sorts of things about the Sentry. Reed is confused, and right then, Doctor Strange appears to try to dissuade him from becoming obsessed with the whole affair. When Reed asks for answers, Doctor Strange refuses to tell him directly about the issue of the Sentry. Instead, he offers to show Reed a vision. In the vision, Reed has invented a device to contain the Sentry. Then he asks Doctor Strange to make them all forget about the aftermath of using his device. Then we cut back to the present, where Doctor Strange asks Reed if he can take his own advice, that is, the ones from the tape, in consideration of the vision he just saw. We'll find out soon enough. Robert visits the X-Men and Professor Xavier next. At least, the Professor recollects bits and pieces of memories of the Sentry. Sentry then mentions the return of the Void, and this scares the hell out of Xavier of all people. The scene then cuts to a time when the Void single-handedly took out the collective of European heroes, just to hint at how powerful he is. Peter Parker follows Robert's advice and starts to look through the back issues of the biggest news magazines in the world. He's looking for the front cover picture of the Sentry that won him the prestigious prize. Just then, his boss at the Daily Bugle walks into the room and starts to question Peter. Peter returns the favor and wants to know why the back issues are numbered wrong. As Peter struggles with this existential riddle, it all starts to come together in his mind. Suddenly, the magazine cover starts to take shape right before his eyes, and just like that, he remembers who the photo is of and who the Sentry is supposed to be. Next, we see Tony Stark being paid a visit by Robert. Tony remembers a little bit more than the others, but he doesn't remember the exact detail. When Robert wants him, Tony deflects the issue, and in the process, he spills the beans. He says he remembers all the heroes of Earth coming together and deciding that the Sentry was dangerous to Earth's existence and had to be neutered. Tony also admits that he wasn't in support of this move at the time because he believed the Sentry had done more good than harm. When Robert tells Tony that the Void is returning, Tony can only say, "God help us all." From Robert going to and fro, he discovers a quite complicated device atop the Sentry tower. Robert assumes it's an AI in the form of a supercomputer, and so he proceeds to find some answers for what exactly is happening. In the process of asking a few questions, Robert realizes that the device is not a computer but a transmitter. It is also responsible for blocking the memory of Sentry throughout the world. Robert also finds out that he agreed to this alongside Reed Richards. The device has been programmed with a virus, so it can't be tampered with, not even by Robert or Reed for that matter. But Robert finds a way around it, and once he deactivates it, the whole world suddenly remembers who the Sentry is, including Reed and all other heroes. But the strange thing is, nobody remembers why the memory-blocking transmitter was set up in the first place. A character like the Scout, who was supposed to be the Sentry's sidekick, suddenly realizes his purpose, but the problem is that he was badly beaten in Maine the last time he confronted the Void. Sadly, he doesn't even remember that. Even Lindy, who is the Sentry's wife, comes running back, having falsely believed that Sentry was a deadbeat. When the transmitter got shut down, she suddenly remembered her love for the real Sentry. But just when everything was beginning to come together, disaster struck. The Void appeared and threatened to destroy Lindy and everything the Sentry stood for, which included the entire universe. Remember, the Void is supposed to be a slightly more powerful negative representation of the Sentry. So at that moment, Reynolds, who is now a fully functioning Sentry, broadcasts to the entire world and says the freak weather anomalies everyone is experiencing are a result of the return of the Void. He then calls on the heroes and villains of Earth to join him in fighting off the Void. He also asks the civilians to be calm. As the Sentry waits for reinforcements at the Statue of Liberty, the Hulk shows up first, followed by a lot more superheroes, including Reed Richards. The villain community is led by the Dr. Octopus, and once they are gathered, the Sentry prepares to take the fight to the Void, but then Doctor Strange appears and pauses time. He draws Reed aside and tries to jog his memory on the reason the transmitter was switched on in the first place. It was so they could contain the darker aspects of the Sentry as was manifested in the Void. Even the Sentry agreed to this back then, and so, before we can see any cataclysmic hero battles, Reed rushes down to the Sentry tower and switches the device back on. And once again, everyone forgets who the Sentry is, and this results in neutralizing the manifestation of the Void. The story ends with Lindy driving Robert Reynolds to a fast food place amid all the destruction around them that no one remembers. The Scout, Billy Turner, takes their order, and you can see the hint of a smirk on Robert's face as if he hasn't entirely forgotten about everything. And that's a wrap. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to get up to speed on related Marvel comic book titles. Thank you for watching, and bye.